Hello, and welcome to another Architects panel discussion brought to you by the Vancouver Island Architects Chapter and the South Vancouver Island Chapter of the RAIC. My name is Andy Gyrie. I'm a local architect with Cascadia Architects and an executive of the Vancouver Island Architects Chapter. I'm grateful to be able to introduce today's discussion. Before we get into the topic at hand for today, I would like to let you know that we have ongoing sessions, including talks on Victoria's seismic issues and heritage buildings. Now I would like to introduce the first of two panel discussions on homelessness and housing. Safe and affordable housing is a basic human need. Yet, whether it is someone living on the streets, in tent cities, or on family and friends' couches, or living paycheck to paycheck, having to choose between rent or other basic needs, like food or medicine, too many of our fellow citizens are suffering because this basic human need is not being met. The causes of this are many and intersectional with other social justice issues. It is a fact that Indigenous and racialized individuals are more likely to experience homelessness, as are people with complex needs or mental health challenges. Regardless of the cause, the experience of not having a place to call home or living in a precarious housing situation is traumatizing to every individual it touches, and it is incumbent upon all of us as a community to do something about it. This and the subsequent panel discussions are specifically related to the question of what architects can do. But the question also applies to every person in our society. What can we all do to address this long-running crisis that seems to have no easy solutions? This first panel brings together individuals from diverse agencies and backgrounds who are on the front line dealing with the issues from the standpoint of policy and social agency. It explores the complexity of the issue and sets the stage for the second session dealing more specifically with challenges and opportunities available for architects and architecture to help find solutions for housing. Our moderator is local architect Catherine Nickerson of Nickerson Consulting Services. Catherine will introduce and ask questions to the panel, and from that we will hear 5 different perspectives. The discussion will be followed by a Q&A. We would like to thank the panelists for volunteering to participate in this discussion. The 5 panelists are Michael Blaschuk, Strategic Advisor to Federal, Provincial, and Municipal Governments; Jean Miller, President, the Centre for Urban Innovation; John Reilly, Manager, Housing Planning and Programs, Capital Regional District; David Simpson, Architect, AIBC, and Founding Partner at DYS Architecture; and Kathy Stinson, CEO of the Victoria Kool-Aid Society. Now on with the session.
What I'm going to do now is call on each of the panel members to introduce themselves so that you just get a little bit of a sketch of who they are and a bit about their background before we get into some questions. So first we've got Kathy Stinson, the Chief Executive Officer from Victoria Kool-Aid Society, and she'll be followed by John Reilly. Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm a CPA by profession and have been working in the not-for-profit and public sector for over 30 years. Although I was born and raised in Ontario, I have had the pleasure of calling Victoria home for over 40 years, and I'm grateful to have built a life and raised a family on the beautiful unceded territory of the Lekwungen people. And I'm thankful to the elders of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations for their stewardship of these lands. I did take a hiatus from Victoria to work for the government of Nunavut for a couple of years, but returned in 2005 to join the Kool-Aid team, inspired in large part by their mission to help end homelessness. I've been the executive director, CEO of Kool-Aid for 16 years now, and I continue to be inspired by the people we serve, by our amazing and compassionate staff working the front lines, by our dedicated board and leadership teams, by our caring and committed partners and funders, and by our wonderfully philanthropic donors who continue to generously support us. Kool-Aid began in 1968, a small grassroots organization started by youth for youth. We evolved and adapted over time to become the Capital Region's largest organization serving people, primarily adults, who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. Kool-Aid now has an annual budget of over $30 million, employs 360 staff, operates 3 shelters, 16 housing sites, a community health center and multiple satellite clinics, a casual labor pool, and a community center. Annually, across our housing and shelter programs, we provide about 400,000 meals, most prepared in our own kitchens. The people we serve range in age from 19 to 90 plus years and access us for reasons of homelessness, poverty, and marginalization. Many are living with substance use, mental health, brain injuries, and many other health challenges, and have often experienced serious trauma in their lives. Through our various programs and services, Kool-Aid helps 12,000 people in Victoria every year. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. That's an incredible array of contributions. And now we're going to go over to John Reilly, who is also on our panel, and he is the Manager of Housing Planning and Programs at the Capital Regional District. Following John, we're going to next go to David Simpson. Please go ahead, John.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks to the organization, to Chris, for inviting me to be here. My journey started in a big island east of here called Newfoundland. I was born in Gander, and that's actually the traditional territory of the Behotak people. And sadly, the Behotak people don't exist anymore because colonization completely eradicated them from the East Coast, and it's a kind of a sad tale. I traveled around the eastern part of our country into central Canada with my family, and then they finally settled in Ottawa, where I completed my first diploma in actually cartography photogrammetry, of all things, but then moved west to practice that trade, and ended up getting into social work. A few years later, I found that the trades were not for me. I completed my bachelor's in social work at University of Calgary, Edmonton Division, and then completed my master's in social work in Kitchener-Waterloo, actually, at Wilfrid Laurier University. And it was specifically in social planning and community development specialization. And then I went back west to Edmonton and worked there for another 20 years almost. And I've filled multiple positions, everything from a frontline social planner to an executive assistant to a municipal politician, and a community organizer, but came to Victoria, the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, where I do make my home now on Douglas Street here in Victoria. Grateful to be here as a guest for about the last 10 years, and have worked both for the City of Victoria and now for the CRD. I was a senior social planner with the city. That's where I met Chris, and have been with the CRD now for a little over 5 years. In their housing and initiatives and programs, which I like to call it. It's the HIP part of the CRD. Of course, the CRD has a range of programs. We have the Capital Region Housing Corporation, which is the largest deliverer of affordable and social housing in the region, almost coming on 2,000 units of housing now. Of course, we also have some capital funding programs, Regional Housing First program, and a Regional Housing Trust Fund program, which have provided grants and supports to build supportive and otherwise affordable housing across the region over the last 15, 20 years. We also manage, and this is where I get my experience in homelessness, we manage the Reaching Home program on behalf of the Government of Canada, which is its homelessness strategy. And I've been doing that for 6 years here. And so we have been working with local nonprofits and organizations to deliver that program. And in the most recent iteration of Reaching Home, we've been required now to work with our colleagues in the community to build a better coordinated system that is supported by a good information system, so we can understand who's being helped and who still is needing help and where the gaps are. So we got lots of work ahead of us. Of course, COVID really exposed the significant structural problems in our society around what happens to people in emergencies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we introduce the questions. So, but I'm really grateful to be here and looking forward to the panel work. Thank
Thanks very much, John. So next we're going to David Simpson, who is an architect, AIBC, and founding partner of DYS Architecture. Following David, we'll be calling on Jean Miller.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here, and it's interesting. It's the first experience for me to be involved in something like this, and it's intriguing to me to bring the architectural community together to sort of look at these issues and talk openly about them, and hopefully something good will build from this. I'm BC born and bred. I lived most of my life in Vancouver, lived in the Fraser Valley, and now I live in White Rock. So I've moved around a little bit from a very large community to a medium-sized community to a very small community. So I've sort of experienced some of that in my own life. Our firm includes a range of projects and clients, private sector, public sector, primarily in housing and healthcare. And there's some commercial, but that's usually related to mixed use. So, and I guess of the housing component, a very large component is what we used to call social housing, now non-market, non-profit. And the number of projects, it's probably equal with the private sector, but the private sector projects are bigger, so there's more units to that. But it's interesting that on a project basis, it's about equal. So we're currently doing quite a few projects that are proceeding even under this new program. John Davidson, Ron Ewan, and I started this firm in 1982. And we only had CMHC work. It was all non-market, and it sustained us through that part of that period of our life, which was in 1982. Things weren't that great, and it was a new experience for me and for all of us. But it sustained us well, and it just became part of what we call the DYS DNA. We've just continued on with it. And what's really interesting to me that it's 39 years now that we've been doing this, and there's probably a lot of you out there that are younger than 40, so I've been doing it for all of your lives, and here we are still talking about it. So it's kind of interesting that it's just an ongoing thing. I think it's almost worse now than it was when I started. In 2009, we got more involved in smaller communities, and we started getting projects on the island. And so we also learned to branch out, and our projects now extend through Prince George, the Okanagan, the island, and of course the Lower Mainland, where most of our projects are, the larger projects are. But it's interesting that I always feel that we make a greater impact in the smaller communities. So I very much enjoy our projects on the island. I also want to say I'm an architect, not a public speaker, I'm not a policy maker, and I'm not an expert in this issue. So like you, I'm here to learn as much as I can. And I realize that we, as architects, seem to be focused on the remedy rather than the cure. And I think this is a great opportunity to sort of work back from that and just look at it holistically and see what the architectural community can do to help the situation, improve the situation, and for us to grow. I was expressing my concern about not being an expert for this panel today with a friend of mine who is a very close friend, and he's a great client, a gentleman on the island who founded his own nonprofit society, and he focuses on education, childcare, and housing. And he came back to me with a comment that I want to share with you, and this is what I'm going to finish with, because I think it's worth considering. His words to me were, experts are no longer required. What is needed and appreciated are individuals with knowledge, an ability to communicate, and a strong sense of humanity. We are all connected. And I immediately thought that's the definition of an architect. So I think coming from the nonprofit, the people they're looking for to help, I think, are people like people in our community. I'd also like to just mention that I think this shouldn't be just considered by firms that want to do non-market housing or that are doing non-market housing, because I think all architects should consider it. It's all interconnected. Healthcare, childcare, work opportunities, they're all interconnected. And I think in the big picture, the goal would be for us to collaborate more and share some of that information. So thank you. That's my introduction.
Great. Thanks very much, David. So now we're going to go over to Jean Miller, and following Jean, we'll hear from Michael Blaschuk. So Jean is the president of the Center for Urban Design Innovation. Please go ahead, Jean.
I came to Victoria in 1970, founded Open Space Cultural Center, Monday Magazine, initiated the Gaining Ground Urban Sustainability Conferences here and in Vancouver and Calgary, have been a development planner with a strong interest in land use and architecture, and have written and continue to write a column for Focus magazine. I have also conceived ASH, which stands for Affordable Sustainable Housing, and I'll talk about that when I get to give my presentation. I think of myself as a cultural entrepreneur.
Great. Thanks very much, Jean.
You're welcome.
And finally then, in terms of our panel, we're going to turn it over to Michael Blaschuk. And Michael is a strategic advisor to all levels of government, including federal, provincial, and municipal. Please go ahead, Michael.
Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to talk about this subject that's near and dear to my heart. I'm the former Vice President of BC Housing and retired Assistant Deputy Minister for Real Property for the province of BC. But I've also been involved in, I led the Architectural Services organization within Foreign Affairs Canada. So I have a long connection with architects, and I think of myself as a friend of the architectural community. I've led or set up about 25 SROs in the downtown east side, handling the renovations. I also designed and set up the first public-private partnership of SROs ever done, where we bundled 13 into a single project. It's the subject of homelessness is not theoretical to me. Both my grandfathers lived and died of their addictions on the downtown east side. So it's something I've lived with the consequences of homelessness and addiction in my family. I've also, in Victoria, managed the shutdown and rehousing of the Victoria Courthouse site in 2016. And most recently in 2020, I was brought back by the province of BC to deal with the Topaz and Pandora sites and deal with those as well. And on those sites where I was on 7 days a week, basically for 6 months total between the two sites, I talked with and virtually knew everyone on the site. So I talked with the government officials, the police and bylaw enforcement, the service providers, the advocates, and the opportunists, the public and the neighbors, the criminal element, and most importantly, those experiencing homelessness. That gave me a lot of insight into that community. So as part of this, I'm going to try and bring my experience in development construction with very much hands-on experience from what I've heard. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's just fantastic. You can see what great breadth and depth of experience we've got on this panel. So I'm very excited to start into some of the more detailed questions. So again, first I'm going to call on Kathy Stinson to respond to the first question, which is, from your experience, Kathy, what do you think are some of the drivers of homelessness in Victoria?
So I did want to start out by saying I think it is really important to recognize that homelessness is not unique to Victoria. And when I'm speaking about homelessness in Victoria, I'm referring to Greater Victoria, not just the municipality that is at the center of our capital region. Homelessness is a major challenge across Canada and North America. It is a problem in Winnipeg and Ottawa and Montreal, all cities with much harsher climates than ours. And the exacerbating challenges we are facing here with the opioid crisis in encampments are challenges across BC in both smaller and larger communities than ours. Now, I don't mean to dismiss the fact that Victoria is a desirable city and attracts people like myself from away. And when there is intense media associated with a particular initiative, such as clearing the courthouse tent city back in 2016, or more recently, the order to clear Topaz Park, individuals from other areas are drawn here. But for the most part, our homelessness challenge here is homegrown. Victoria is also an expensive city, particularly with respect to housing. Affordable rental housing is scarce, and the older, more affordable stock is disappearing. There was an article just in today's TC speaking to this very real issue. These are factors for sure, but they are not the main drivers of homelessness. And while some might like to think that homelessness is an individual problem, some bad choices combined with some bad luck, that would be a very simplistic perspective. The pervasiveness of homelessness across the continent and the growing nature of the challenge indicate that the drivers are both structural and systemic in nature. Not so much the result of bad decisions by individuals, but the result of bad laws and policies. Colonization and the Indian Act, the child welfare system, the criminal justice system, the war on drugs, social assistance policies, racism, and discrimination. All these systems and structures have resulted in multi-generational poverty and trauma, particularly amongst Indigenous people who are vastly overrepresented in homelessness. At the end of the day, while Victoria has some unique drivers that may cause homelessness to be a somewhat more problematic here than elsewhere, the more serious drivers are really out of our immediate control. And that's where I'm going to stop on that question.
Great. Thank you very much, Kathy. So to John now, we're going to ask the same question to John Reilly. From your experience, John, what do you think are some of the drivers of homelessness in Victoria?
So I'm going to pick up where Kathy left off. Again, most people assume that it's because of personal failures, but really the failures are structural. A lot of folks don't know that really it's rooted in structural oppression through both our political, social, and economic systems. It actually comes, the origins of our social welfare policies come out of the Elizabethan Poor Law from England, because we were a colony of England. And they identified people as deserving and undeserving. And I'd like folks just to kind of reflect on that, as we hear often, you know, whether or not those folks out there, quote, deserve help or support. That's been a long standing issue in our whole social welfare system for many, 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 many centuries. In 1834, actually, poverty was identified as a moral failing. So people were not even given any support at all, and were left to their own devices. And many people starved, died. I came from Irish heritage, and I tell you, that sure had an impact on my ancestors in Ireland when the famine hit. There were millions of people who starved to death because they refused to provide relief to people. In post-World War II era, we did see new social welfare legislation which tried to address these systemic issues. And we saw progressive development of effective legislation and policy over the years. But there still is the remnants of those we consider to be deserving and undeserving. We've also got a long history of colonial rule here over Indigenous people and the oppression of Indigenous people through both the reserve laws, residential schools, Indian hospitals, criminalization of the population, the lack of voter rights, all kinds of things. And even now, when people have their earning power, we still have what I call a persistent clinging of our society to substantial and growing inequities in income. We know the billionaires are getting richer, and the poorest among us, the folks who rely on public income, have seen their incomes flattened completely over the last 30 to 35 years. And in our country, in the last 30 years, there was a complete abandonment by both our federal and, to some degree, provincial politicians, political parties to housing and social welfare policies. And they've really left it to the provinces and even now local communities, which are completely unable to meet that need. Kathy also mentioned systemic failures. Those include things like income, wage, and pension disability benefit programs are so fragmented. There's hundreds of different income programs that outreach workers have to try to help people navigate through our health system. Anybody who's had a major complication in their health will know how challenged our illness response system can be to responding to their needs, and the fragmentation of those systems. Mental health, of course, is even worse. The underfunding and the resourcing of those programs leave many of those who are most poor out of the ability to actually access supports and programs that are needed to sustain their mental health. Disability, chronic disabilities or workplace disabilities can throw people right out of a well-paying job into abject poverty if they haven't got substantial savings. So these kinds of systemic failures are substantial. And some of the people that are out there have many stories that are related to either mental health, substance use disorders, disabilities. Age now even is becoming a factor, which is really worrisome. And then there is a fragmented homelessness response system. The housing, the social services, the health interventions, the supportive housing, substance use and recovery programs, mental health services. Many of them operate very much on their own mandates and are not well coordinated. We're working hard to do that. We'll talk a little bit about solutions a little later. But then finally, I did want to touch on personal characteristics, and I'll just read a few of them off and just to understand what kind of characteristics do people have that tend to face the greatest challenges to experiencing homelessness. And that's number one is Indigenous. Number two is probably a former ward of the child welfare system. And of course, you see the intersection with Indigenous and child welfare engagement. Previous incarceration, disability or health complications. Brain trauma is a significant problem. People who have significant brain trauma have difficulty maintaining housing and jobs. Low levels of education, untreated mental health conditions, racialization of populations, and really discrimination in the housing markets and employment markets against them and in education, and those who are precariously employed. And when you think about some of those characteristics, I'd like you to think about how many of them are really under the control of those individuals themselves. So what sometimes it leads to is hard-heartedness in our society. And I think that's one of the things we've really got to change, is that hard-heartedness to help people understand that these are human beings who have real lived experiences that many of us have never had to even deal with in our lives, and to show a little bit more compassion and support for them. So that's where I stand on that. So let's move along. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And now we're going to go over to David Simpson. And David, again, from your experience, what do you think are some of the drivers of homelessness in Victoria?
Well, I'm going to focus on just a couple or three items that I see, and it's from our history of work and our current work, and it's nowhere as vast and encompassing as the first two speakers, but I think it's, from an architectural point of view, it's a challenge, and I think it's driving a lot of things in our lives right now. And the most obvious one, of course, is the cost of housing and creating affordable housing. And I mentioned they've been at it for 40 years, and I think that problem has increased over time. I think it's getting worse. We're faced with high cost of land and high cost of construction in BC, and yet income levels, relatively speaking, haven't progressed that much. You start thinking about trying to create housing for at the lowest income of, say, $350 a month in rental, and you equate that, as architects know, to the cost of building a one-bedroom unit. It's pretty expensive. So it's hard to develop or provide housing for folks without deep subsidies. And so that's a challenge all around, where that money comes from, how it's dealt with, how it's put out there. And another good example is just what we're going through now. Just think about it with this pandemic and how that's impacted people and how many people have lost income. And yet a couple of realtor friends that I have told me 2020 was the best year they've ever had. So there's this great divide between who can afford what and what's available. So much of our housing is market driven, and it's a challenge to change that attitude and sort of swing it back to getting more into the social architecture and providing housing for folks that really need it. The other thing I see, and sadly to say it, it's a lack of community acceptance and understanding. One of the biggest challenges we face is putting affordable housing in existing communities. There is still that stigma. There's still something about it that makes it difficult. And And finding appropriate sites, appropriate locations for it is a challenge. Getting people to accept it. There's lengthy approval processes that are a result of that, and getting things approved, getting it through, getting the financing is a challenge. So that's driving, and it's lengthening the period it takes to create this housing. So it compounds itself. I mean, housing that should be built now isn't going to be built for a few years, and in the meantime, things just get worse and worse. So it just builds up. And another interesting thing that happens is in a number of our projects, density has been lost to appease the neighbors. And so there's, in some cases, there's just not the appropriate use of land, or it's not being used to its highest and best use, which a private sector developer seems to be able to do. So I think that's another driver of the condition architecturally, or from the construction and building side. The other thing that I see, and one of the reasons we sort of are interested in working in smaller communities, is that there's this migration to larger communities, because the smaller communities are really lacking in resources. And up until the last little while, a lot of the money, or if not most of the money, was spent in the Lower Mainland and in some of the big centers. And yes, it was needed, but smaller communities were left behind. And all that's done, from what I can see, is put more pressure on the bigger communities, because people tend to migrate to where they think the support might be, where they think the help and the housing might be. And they get there and it's not always there. So I think it's pressure on small communities driving people and creating pressure on the larger communities. So those are just a few things that I see in terms of our work. I think we can deal with it, but we're not at this stage. So.
Great, thanks, David. That's another really interesting series of observations around the drivers. Thank you. So over to you now, Jean, and we look forward to your perspectives.
I have almost nothing to add to all of the comments that I've heard, which in their totality are encyclopedic as a response to your question. What I want to try to do is to come at this obliquely. And I want to start by saying that I'm not interested as a social participant, a player in the city of Victoria. I'm not interested in the causes of homelessness. I'm interested in housing the homeless. In other words, people will still have problems even if they're housed, that I understand. But it seems to me that the objective is to create environments that reduce risk, both for the currently unhoused and for the community at large. So that's my exclusive concern. I think it's useful to examine the challenges of housing the unhoused from a current events perspective. That is, with a really nervous eye fixed on the near future of mounting environmental and economic and other stresses that are going to claim, I think, all of our energy and bandwidth. So from my perspective, if we're going to come up with a response to housing the homeless, I think time's very much of the essence. I worry, and I'm well known for saying this, I worry that when the going gets tough, Victoria holds a workshop. And I think that the city has a kind of an endless capacity to do that. And all it really is a kind of a stall. I say this, by the way, taking nothing away from the extraordinary good work and investments that have been described at length by all the other panelists. So I know that there's goodwill, I know there's intention, and I know that things are happening. Clearly, though, for any of 100 reasons, it appears not to be enough, which is why this is the theme of this workshop conference. So I'll circle back to where I began. My only interest is in strategies, land use strategies, and architectural housing strategies that will provide homes for the currently unhoused.
Thank you, Gene. That's great observations and contribution there. And so then now we'll go over to Michael Blaschuk. Michael, from your experience, what do you think are some of the drivers of homelessness in Victoria?
Hi. So I guess one of the things I did learn from both the downtown east side and sort of the Victoria encampments is, that I chatted with almost everyone on the site. And the most common, and it was almost every person I met, the common element was trauma. That they had a trauma in their life. It tended to be whether it was physical or sexual abuse, it was head injury, mental illness, in a number of cases, loss of a child. I saw sudden financial challenges to people who would otherwise had been employed. One I was quite shocked to discover was undiagnosed, untreated illness, particularly related to either fetal alcohol syndrome or another one called Fragile X. I have a son who's Fragile X. It's a genetic disorder. And it's something, because I coach Special Olympics and I have a number of my athletes, it's something I can see. And I saw that on the 10th cities, which was, for me, was quite shocking. So I saw that there were a number of causes always centered around trauma in their life, and that the drugs and alcohol were being used as self-medication to address the trauma. It was the result of the situation they found themselves in. It wasn't the cause of the situation. And it really reflected to me on what we all learned in university, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we're taught this theory that the first level was physiological. One of the key criteria was shelter. And it really is that. It's what Housing First is about. It's about getting the shelter. Once you get the shelter, you can start addressing some of the challenges that people have had by these traumas. But getting the shelter is a big key to addressing the issue of homelessness. That's what I learned being on those sites. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. And as all of the panel members expressed, there are many issues out there that are driving homelessness, and there's a vast array of experiences of observing them. And so now we're going to move on to finding solutions. And so I'm going to go back to Kathy Stinson, please, and ask you, Kathy, what are your thoughts on finding solutions to homelessness in Victoria?
Thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, yeah.
So I think first we need to recognize that homelessness can't really be solved one city at a time. Certainly we can create solutions for individuals. Providing housing with support to an individual experiencing homelessness does indeed solve the problem for that individual. But unless we tackle the challenge at its source, deal with some of those systemic and structural drivers that are causing homelessness, the challenge itself will continue to grow. And of course, housing is a big part of the solution. People who are homeless need homes, but we cannot build ourselves out of this problem. Housing, even housing with all the right supports, is not a cure for the underlying cause. Unfortunately, I think that the real solution to homelessness must be political. Governments at all levels need to make big changes. And governments don't usually make those changes unless we, the people, make it overwhelmingly clear that we want change to happen. But that is a huge and daunting proposition. It feels too big, too overwhelming. And so, that being said, there are definitely solutions we can implement to at least alleviate, if not solve, the challenge of homelessness in Victoria. So to get out of bed each morning, I take the starfish on the beach approach. We can create solutions for the people here and now who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And the local solution is about providing housing and supports. First of all, I think we need to take a regional approach. All municipalities need to step up and be part of the solution. This as well requires political commitment at the local level and may require provincial intervention if that commitment is not forthcoming. The inclusion of supportive and mixed-use affordable housing should be mandated in every local area plan. Planning departments need to alleviate red tape. They can fast-track truly affordable housing projects. Neighborhood associations can encourage their members through education and relationship building exercises to welcome supportive and affordable housing projects into their neighborhoods. And of course, each of us as individuals can be part of the solution. We can advocate for change. I'm sorry.
No problem there, Kathy. We can carry on with over to John and then circle back if that's okay. Okay, thank you. John, then, so we're going to switch over to your response, please, on your thoughts on finding solutions to homelessness in Victoria.
So I'm going to underscore just what Kathy just said about everybody's responsibility. I think everybody on this call to engage our both political and federal politicians and political entities to show more leadership in terms of especially policy. There's lots of money flowing right now, but that money doesn't have any policy attached to it long term. And we could invest in a pile of housing in the next maybe 5 or 10 years, but we need long-standing policy that directs us towards a rights-based approach to services and housing across our entire country. So that'd be number one. But that's not what we can do in the local area. That's something we got to nudge other political leadership and others to do on our behalf. But we need to make our voices known. I wanted to support Kathy's statements about needing to see a much stronger regional commitment to this. We are seeing some municipalities outside of the standard municipalities starting to look at including housing projects that are addressing the needs of homeless individuals. We're actually rolling out a plan. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Some of the projects we're actually rolling out, I don't want to get into it right now, but I think in major plans like OCPs and stuff, making commitments to ensuring an equitable distribution of housing within a given jurisdiction is really important. And any efforts that municipal approving authorities can to expedite initiatives to get housing built, especially the affordable housing built as quickly as possible. But I think there also needs to be some of the demand measures that we're seeing our provincial government take leadership on. We need to have people support our provincial government in doing that to ensure that housing that does get built doesn't get used just for speculative purposes in order to drive particular markets upward in value at the expense of the many who are of lower incomes. So we need to see some of that work done. But there's also other things underneath all of this that address some of those structural issues I talked about. And number one is really everyone making a commitment to making reconciliation with Indigenous peoples a priority in their hearts and minds in everything that we do, to be thinking about it and to be considering about the lands that we're on and the people who were displaced and the impacts that they had. Because the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the homelessness population is staggering. In Winnipeg, it's 70% of people homeless are Indigenous. Here it's 35%. 35% of the people out there are Indigenous. Only 4.5% of our population is Indigenous. So there's something clearly wrong here and needs to be rectified. So, and we need to engage Indigenous community and First Nations communities far more readily in finding solutions to the issues that are facing their own people. We need to involve people with lived experience in looking at design elements and the kinds of communities they actually want to live in. Some aren't interested in standard individualistic housing options and are looking for community-based approaches to living with one another and supporting one another. It's happening out in those parks right now. Some of them are actually naturally organizing into small groups. We need to look at listening more carefully to what their needs are and building that into the development of housing is listening to their voices. And I just want to strengthen again, we all can do work to change the hearts and minds of everyday Victorians to better understand where homelessness has come from, why people are experiencing it, and their lived experiences, to begin to open people's hearts to considering folks being able to live and experience the very same privileges that many of us have living in our communities. If we don't change that, you know, the folks out there in those parks and in the shelters know that they are considered as unwanted and undeserving people. I've seen it firsthand in my work, where folks who had been experiencing homelessness were looking at some units that we were offering to them to be living in. And one of them looked at me and said, you know, it's a very nice unit out at Millstream Ridge, and said to me, oh, this is a nice unit, but show us the one that that you're going to offer to us. And it just broke my heart. I said, this is one of the units that you'll be living in. And they were amazed. And I said to them, you know, don't let anybody tell you that you don't deserve to have a decent home. You deserve a home just like anybody else. So we've got to help change the hearts and minds of those who send that message to them, because they keep hearing it over and over again. We won't change their hearts and minds until we treat people differently. And I think that's really fundamental. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Some very, very strong points there as well. And now we'll go over to David Simpson. And David, what are your thoughts on finding solutions to homelessness in Victoria and other parts of the province?
And other parts of the province. Yes, it's all interconnected, isn't it? Very much so. So John had some great points, and he touched on some of the issues that I see around the planning and the architecture. So I thought I would just focus in a little bit more on some of the things. And unfortunately, some of it might be just pet peeves that I have in terms of getting through the process, but I think we should just talk about it. I think one of the solutions is sharing information. And I'm talking now about the architectural community. Pulling together a bit and sharing information. And an example I have is we did our first passive house project a few years ago. And John, it was an Indigenous project, just so you know. And it was interesting. Nobody on the team had done one before. And it was interesting how much collaboration and information was out there. There were people sharing information freely, openly. There were groups organizing, model professionals and modelers organizing little chat sessions to get together and talk about it. And we learned very quickly, and it was very successful. And I think it opened up, from my perspective, opened up a lot of opportunities in terms of moving forward with those types of buildings, but also in adapting those types of buildings to deal with this issue of providing homes for folks that wouldn't normally have access to them, let's put it that way. So there's all different levels of it in there. Our client also made it a requirement that the design team would openly share information and talk to others, and that happened. We had other nonprofits come in and talk to us, offer suggestions, ask questions. And now we're being brought back together by the Passive House Institute to do a revisit of the project and see how it's working and see how residents are dealing with it, and successes, the things that maybe don't work so well. And this is after they've been in it for, I think, 3 years now. So I think from my perspective, if there's something that could be done within our community that would sort of bring that forward in terms of housing, not just the technical aspects of it, but in terms of the issues that we're trying to deal with, I think it could be very helpful to us as architects and to us as people who have to deliver this project, this product. I'd also like to see more encouragement in innovative design. And I find that we're very restricted in many ways. We have design constraints. We have BC housing guidelines, and interesting enough, we do projects in the Lower Mainland and doing a project at Prince George. It's the same rule book. Climate's different. The residents are different. cost of construction is dramatically different, and yet we're still working to the same rule book. And I think that's something that we should push for as architects to sort of loosen that up. Municipal design guidelines are another thing. In some of the smaller communities in particular, the guidelines are kind of out of date. They don't address form and character for energy efficient buildings, form and character for, let's call it non-profit social housing, shall we call it? And we keep constantly bump our heads up against that, and it drags things out, it adds costs. And I think as architects, we should stand up and say, wait a minute, we know a little bit more about this than you're letting us provide to you. So I'm hopeful that in some way we could open that door a little bit and get some flexibility. We're doing a great job. Architects in this province are doing a great job. The whole province is doing a great job of providing housing if you look at the rest of Canada. But it's really restricted in those ways. I think looking for options to make land available. And we have that on some of our projects, and it's very successful. Municipalities providing land at low cost to the project. Municipality retains ownership. 60-year mortgage is up, and it's still municipal land, and it's open for future development. In fact, we've been at it so long, we've had projects torn down and rebuilt with buildings that are like 3 times the size as zoning changes. So I think I think that's a great opportunity. There's other institutions out there that are doing it. Churches, I think it's the United Church that has a program going where they're redeveloping their land. There's one 2 blocks from me here in White Rock that they're doing. It'll incorporate their church plus housing. So it's making better use of land that's around, and because we're all connected to these people and we're doing, let's say, even community facilities, sort of finding ways to incorporate housing in those places where that land is being made available, all the amenities are being provided on that site, why not add some housing? So again, that's where the interconnection comes between architects that are working in that field and those who are familiar with the housing side of it. And bringing in the private sector, and that's happening. Our private sector clients are providing affordable housing, as it's called, in some of their big projects in the trade-off for density, but it's a trade-off for density, and they do it more or less because they're forced to do it, I think. But I think that's still a great option. I think we should encourage more of that and see if we can't find ways to swoosh that out a little bit more. The other thing I'd like to see happen is to stop the competitive environment that we're working in. And an example is the latest BC proposal call that went out for housing. We submitted 8 projects for that. Our firm alone submitted 8 projects. And it's very difficult for the nonprofits to prepare for that. It's a huge expense. They don't all have the funding for it. And I'm thinking there should be a better process to select who does what and get that collaboration going, because some of them were left behind because when that was announced, there was no PDF funding available anymore because it became a competition. So some of those folks got left behind, but it's kind of crazy. I mean, we're competing against ourselves for projects. So, I think those are a few of the things. They're not very philosophical, but I think in my mind, these are the kinds of things that as architects we could approach, and we could attack some of these issues and try and make some changes. Our colleagues work in planning departments, they're planners, they're architects for municipalities. And I think given some assistance, they would be more likely to stand up in the municipality and say, no, the way we're doing it's maybe not right. Maybe we have to change our philosophy on parking and density and heights and all these kinds of things. So, so it just plays on what the others are saying, but to me, I have to think in practical terms, I guess. So to me, that's some of the obstacles I've run up against.
Great. Thank you very much, David. So we're going to turn it over to Jean now for your thoughts, please, on on finding the solutions to homelessness.
Thanks. By the way, David, I really enjoyed and appreciated some of your reflections that you just shared with us. Wanted to let you know about that. I'm a catastrophist, and I think terrible things are going to happen real soon. And this doesn't make me pessimistic, but what it does is to lend a powerful sense of urgency, which is probably reinforced by the fact that my next birthday will be my 79th. So that's lending some speed to my intentions as well. People respond to threat, and I think that's why they don't want the homeless in their neighborhoods or their communities. They see the homeless, they consider the homeless to be threat. I think that if we define the need to alter that perception as a kind of a strategic first step or a theoretical first step to ensure the provision of housing, we will lose 100 years before we make a successful response to the housing challenge. So I think we need to, yes, we can acknowledge that it takes both architecture and social architecture. But I say again, I think it's a worry to me that if the requirement for the level of change that some of the other speakers have correctly identified, we're going to have to wait too long rather than successfully respond to the challenge of housing the homeless. So what that makes me think of is how do you make the challenge smaller and more manageable? How do you make the challenge of a size that you can actually deal with it? I conceived a housing concept called ASH, which is an acronym for Affordable Sustainable Homes or Housing. The idea is dead simple. It's the contemporized expression of a houseplex, a suited home. On a standard lot, it can be designed to provide a minimum of 12 suites, each with its own entrance, providing independence to the residents, to the occupants, and making the building 100% efficient. And each of these ASH houseplexes can also and should also have a resident manager suite to ensure order and to provide social supports. I leave the matters of size and layout and outfitting and the amenities to the professionals, people who understand these things much better than I do. This is essentially a house. It can go up quickly. It can go up affordably. The development numbers are manageable. The finished results offer housing and some potential for internal building society, which, as I learn listening to the other speakers, is very important. Location, and this speaks more to the social or the political architecture, locations can be distributed, they can be selected in mixed use and transition areas as a way of maybe reducing some of that community resistance, because there's no question you can, if you're trying to provide housing, you can absolutely beat your brains out and lose so much energy and momentum if you're attempting to convince established residential communities to say yes, where all of their impulse is to say no. But I think that Victoria, like every other city, has areas that are currently mixed use or transitional or ex-industrial or ex-commercial. I think they offer themselves as appropriate candidates close to downtown, not too deep into established neighborhoods. Victoria could likely eliminate, and I confess my ignorance here, but I give you these numbers based on what I gather from what I read. Victoria could probably eliminate the post-COVID homeless challenge with 50 or so of such buildings. My point being, those are not big numbers, and I think it would be possible to develop a political strategy that could quickly accommodate numbers of that scale. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. Some very good points there as well.
Oh, there is one thing I'll add, if I may. I don't know if this will show, but just to leave nothing to the imagination, that's basically what a ash looks like. It looks like a house. It would be appropriate on any residential suite. It's got 6 suites with individual entrances at the front, and the same condition is reversed at the back.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. Okay, and now on Michael, please, with your thoughts on finding solutions.
Okay, I'm going to sort of discuss it more from, very much a design perspective. I think that can be part of it. I think it's really important to differentiate people being suggestion that people are the homeless. I think it's different. I think you need to recognize these are people experiencing homelessness, and they're really looking for a path to housing. I think we got to be careful how we categorize people in this. But ultimately, I think it's a case of the form needs to follow the function. Design needs to meet needs. At present, we shoehorn people into structures, into existing building codes, into existing bylaws and policies. And that's where we've been using the SROs and the hotels and the motels. We've been doing that. But really, what we need to think about is new built projects, but they don't need to emulate existing housing designs or bylaws or codes. We need to look at the program needs of people. How are we going to do that and let their needs lead the design and lead the updates to policies and codes? Continually told that we have to deliver a 1-bedroom apartment of a minimum square foot to deal with this, and ultimately that may be a destination on the path to housing. But on that path, I think there's other solutions that are there. And I think the architectural community could play a big role on there. Can you live in less than 300 square feet? I'm living on a sailboat that I've done for 8 years now in my experiment, and I'm perfectly happy being here. What I did learn in doing the SROs was how much design played in helping address the solutions. In doing some of the first ones, we started introducing single cooking facilities with a living room, small kitchen onto a floor, shared washrooms. One of the first things that came back was that people noted what a difference this was making in their life. It was the convenience of having that. It allowed them to emulate a family home that they never grew up in. They had bedrooms with a kitchen and living room down the hall that let them socialize, let them feel part of a bigger thing. I think there's things we could have added. I think we often wonder if people are homeless, why we see them on the streets, because we haven't set up many of those developments with the social network and social supports that allows hobbies, pursuits, all those sort of things that most of us truly do. Many of them have to pursue that outdoors because the facilities were never set up and designed that way. In doing those designs, we discovered the challenge of bed bugs and brought the designers in to find a solution. Everyone was telling us we need to freeze everything. Well, we ended up discovering we need to cook everything. We created the first bed bug saunas, literally with sauna heaters. We literally had the sauna heaters. We created rooms. We brought them to different temperatures. I had days where I had bags of bed bugs on my desk, trying to determine which ones, what temperature and for how long allowed for the treatment. That was, and if part of good design, we discovered even when we did that, the little critters ended up on the floor and managed to escape. So by getting a better design with better insulating floors, we ended up solving a long-term problem we had in our facilities. That you needed in design to provide for shopping carts. That's a big part of people's lives. If you didn't do that, they didn't come indoors. That you had to be able to provide for couples. You had to provide for pets. If they couldn't bring their pets indoor and be part of it, they weren't coming in. We also discovered that the larger the developments, the larger the problems, the greater risk. And there were tipping points. There were tipping points where they got to a certain size where a criminal element would come in and actually seize control of the developments that from the nonprofit operators who were challenged to run them. So there were design limits in how many people you could house. That they needed to be rugged in use, but not in appearance. That a lot of people were coming in off the streets, still, suffering a lot of the challenges they had from addiction and abuse, which could be hard on the units themselves. So you had to think about design and how you would do that, yet not make it look like a fortified complex. And there were, many ways of doing that. That also that, as mentioned, First Nations were disproportionately impacted, and to bring in elements of First Nation design into the facilities had a big difference. On many of the ones in the downtown east side, if you look at many of them on the side, you'll see the artwork there. I built those into the projects, with some resistance. There was a cost of putting that in, but I could also show that it had such a positive impact on the facility that additional cost more than paid for itself. It's still a challenge. 2 years ago, I built the downtown drug treatment court center in Vancouver, and really what was needed was a room that was sort of culturally reflected that could be used. I could build the room, I couldn't finish it. So the attributes that I worked with the architect to add to the room to make it more culturally sensitive actually came out of my own pocket to put those in, but it was worth it because I knew the end result would work. And I think there's a lot of things happening. We mentioned, it was mentioned before, things that the province and the federal government are doing that are going to help. And I think with this new rapid housing initiative, I've got 3 projects in right now on behalf of one city in there. But I think the idea that having solutions that are scalable, rapid, purpose designed, and temporary are going to be key. Allowing the temporary structure allows us to access a lot of sites we weren't going to be able to access. So making certain we've got something that can be put together, taken apart, and reused, I think that the architectural community can improve on what I've seen so far, but allow us to access building sites that we haven't thought of before, under bridge structures, irregular shaped lots, government sites that are held for short-term use for future use. Lands that developers are holding. Imagine giving tax exemptions to contributions that land during its holding period, as long as we could place temporary structures on there. And a lot of lease lands. You can lease a land for 20 or 30 or 40 years. If you're putting a structure that's going to be 20 or 30, 40 years. So I think those are things I think that the architectural community can delve into. But the big thing is to take a more aggressive and proactive approach to suggesting alternate designs, rather than sort of reacting to a need for X number of housing in a city, but start thinking about how would we actually change the thought process and how would we change design to meet the program needs. And I think we would end up with much different structures than we're building today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And for your comments were very broad and really did touch on another topic that we want to deal with here is what exactly the architectural community could do to make housing a reality for people experiencing homelessness in our area. And so I'm going to go back and ask each one of you now to incorporate that question into your closing remarks, because we've got about 10 and a couple minutes remaining. So if everybody could think about what the architectural community could specifically do and what your final thoughts are on this topic for today, because it's obvious that this is a very, very big and important topic. And we're going to look forward to continuing the conversation another day. But I'll go back to Kathy Stinson, if you're available there, Kathy, to give us your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, so I actually spent a lot of work on the question that was preceded that, because that's kind of where Kool-Aid's jam is in actually providing services and supports. But I want to just say that from an architectural perspective, I really appreciated a lot of what David had to say. I mean, I think right now that there's really a focus through the funding sources that we have on kind of a one-size solution to homelessness, and it's very much geared to the folks that are the most challenged, that are most street entrenched, and you know, there's a lot of range in people experiencing homelessness, a lot of difference, and that one size of housing for a group, it just is not the right way to go. And you know, I think we really need some pushback on that, and I think the architectural community could help with that. Certainly Kool-Aid has worked with many architects over the years, and we've always found them to be very accommodating, very supportive, very sensitive to the needs of the people we're trying to serve, and really wanting to do the best job they can in creating a building that's going to meet those needs. And certainly purpose-built is absolutely the way to go if you can. I mean, certainly Kool-Aid has taken over old motels and those kind of buildings, but purpose-built absolutely makes a difference and provides that dignity. And we've learned a lot of lessons over the years, and certainly the needs of that very challenged group are quite different from the needs of others. And you know, what might be considered kind of affordable housing that anyone might want to live in will work for very many people that are experiencing homelessness. And you know, we don't need to have that, you know, really hardened kind of construction that is being looked at for many of the new supportive housing projects that BC Housing is taking on. I think the other things that architects can do is certainly join housing association boards. Certainly we've had the good fortune of having architects on our board in the past, and I think they bring real value and insight to a housing provider. So I would certainly, you know, advocate for that. And certainly, you know, just the fact of advocacy as kind of a baseline for everybody to get behind. You know, we all have a voice, and architects have a lot of cachet. They get a lot of respect out in the community. And if more architects speak up about this issue and speak to what some of the solutions could be, I think that, you know, it might help getting some of those solutions implemented. You know, helping people to understand, you know, what does housing first really mean? And, you know, there's, you know, I see lots of chatter on different websites about, we just need to provide shelter for folks. We don't need to provide expensive housing, but it's actually more expensive to provide shelter than it is to provide housing. It costs twice as much to house an individual in our emergency shelter than it does to house them in one of our well-supported supportive housing buildings. So I think it's really important to get that message out that housing really is the solution, but it's housing with the right supports attached. And I think that's one of the areas where Kool-Aid's been able to really make a difference, is because we're able to offer so many of those supports ourselves. You know, we have the health services, we have our health teams that come into our buildings and connect with folks directly. We have a community center where arts and recreation programs are happening that we can encourage tenants to connect with. Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot we can do at the local level. And I think we all need to play a role in that. And at the same time, we also need to play that larger role. I mean, certainly one of the things that Kool-Aid does is belong to larger organizations like BC Nonprofit Housing, like the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. And certainly CHRA has been really instrumental in really helping to bring a national housing strategy to Canada through their advocacy work and really that rights-based approach to housing. And, you know, everybody, like John said, embracing reconciliation, recognizing our role in how Indigenous people are so overrepresented in the issue of homelessness, and that we all have a responsibility to make change there. And you know, that we can each do our part as an individual, as an organization, as an association, and that yeah, it behooves all of us to be working together on this incredibly important challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And John, we're going to go back to you now, please, for your closing remarks and wrap up.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Kathy. I'll just yeah, again, underscore a lot of what Kathy said. We hired an architect, by the way, and we're really happy with him. He's doing a very good job. So I know that one of our planners is really pleased with the contribution that he's making to our work here. So there you go. And a little Rudy toot toot for architects. You know, I think, you know, the work that has to be done around there's deeper policy changes too that have to happen. And the way we think about our human society has to really fundamentally change. It's about that, you know, what Michael was talking about, I think, with regards to the traumas that these folks have suffered. Yes, probably almost every one of them have suffered unbelievable multiple traumas in their lives, which are related to many of those oppressive qualities that I've discussed. Not all of them. Some of them are workplace, you know, accidents and things that happen to people that render them unable to participate fully in the employment systems in our economy. So, you know, we've really got a really simple, but also like family policies and income policies that, you know, to ensure that people have adequate income to support themselves and their children and their families. So many people who end up structurally homeless in their lives came through the child welfare system. And why is that system failing? Because we don't, and why is there such a pipeline into that system? Well, because those families aren't adequately supported and cared for by our common use of our taxes and our public funds to make sure that we're compensating those who work in an economy that is structurally unequal. And if we're going to continue to support a structurally unequal economy, then we've got to stand up as people and speak to that and say, well, then we need to help ensure that people don't fall completely through these massive gulfs that are growing between rich and poor. And we've got to stand up and speak about the importance of working together as a community to ensure that we're all well, we're all taken care of, all children, all women, all families, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, racialized, non-racialized. We've really got to really create that as an ethos in us. So I would encourage every architect to operate to some level from that ethos. Will make a big difference and begin to see the world through those lenses. I think will begin to drive changes in practices, changes in relationships, and a renewal and a strengthening and a positive relationships, while we also do some of the hard work that we've talked about, the kinds of task-oriented things that we have to get done, and leverage the kind of resources that are available today, because there's lots of them, to build new housing opportunities for many different people. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, John, very much. And we're now going to go over to David, and I'm sure you can pick up on the points that John has made around, and Kathy, what architects can do in this effort, and your final thoughts on the topic for today.
Okay, so it's pretty hard to follow all of that. I mean, that was great. That pretty much covers it, I think. So I would just focus or circle back to all my architectural colleagues here and just say, what can we do? Well, it would be great to see something more come out of this. It would be great to carry this discussion on and actually see something solid created within either the chapter or the AIBC, however that works, that could really start to bring all of us together. Because I go back to my good friend's words about bringing people together with knowledge and communication and strong sense of humanity. That's who we are. That's what we do. We're great communicators. We have all the tools to reach out to people, to bring people together, and to address the issues with community and try and get through these obstacles. But I don't think it works doing it one by one. We've had a lot of success in our firm and our projects have worked out, but I think it's bigger than that. And I think it, as I said before, I think it encompasses everybody. It's, again, this client of mine, it's interesting, man, his focus is on education and health, and housing to him is a support to that. And his belief is that if we can get people safe and healthy and educate them, the problem will start to look after itself in a way. So I think we're involved in all those aspects of it. I think, as I said, we have the tools. We're the guys that deliver the end product. So we need to kind of reverse engineer that and come back to how best do we do that. And I just feel as an architect, we need the support. We need somebody behind us to say that, hey, we don't have crazy ideas. We have ideas that work. They might not jive with what the municipality wants, but no, it's the right way to go. So some support in that might be good. I don't know how that works. I'm not that kind of person that can figure that out, but I just think there's a wealth of information within our community. And I'm talking provincially now, not just Victoria. I know the focus right now is Victoria, but again, reaching out, I see it. And for example, just to close the project we're doing a project in Prince George. It's huge. It's Indigenous. It's going to house about 700 people overall. Wonderful master plan community. When they approached us to do the project, I said, well, why would we do it? It's going to cost you more for us. It's travel and so. And they said, there's nobody here that can do it. There isn't the expertise. As architects, we gravitate to the bigger centers too to survive. So I think some of those other smaller communities could well benefit from some collaboration within the Institute that gives us all the background and information and clout to help make the change that's needed to get this done, because we're ideas people, and I think they need to turn us loose and let us come up with some ideas.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, David. And now for the last wrap-up comments, please, we'll go over to Michael Blaschuk.
Okay, hopefully I'll be quick. I think the big thing with the architectural community is be more proactive, to band together, use your collective innovation. There is strength in numbers. Bringing as assistant deputy minister in the government, when associations and organizations would approach the government, they got heard. And, in your field, the various construction associations were very successful that would get me to the table, would get the Treasury Board senior people to the table, and really proactively work on both challenges and ideas. I think there's ways you can do that to get your community to the table with, and I think there's ways you can seek funding to come up with new ideas and new innovations, rather than be reactive to needs to specific project, to be more saying we want to try and create new designs that can help people on the pathway to housing. And one of the best ways to do that is develop, as we're finding that path, is to develop those pathfinder projects, the ones that let us test, let us find out if these are steps. There are multiple solutions. It was brought up earlier, multiple solutions to homelessness and ultimately, hopefully leading to affordable housing, but there are different options that are still needed. They're not there yet. And I think your community could play a big role in being more proactive in doing that. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Wow, we've just had such an amazing conversation here, and I just really appreciate all the great points that have been brought forward. And again, this is most likely the the start of the conversation, although I might just add, I seem to have perhaps slipped over Jean there. My apologies, Jean. Did you have some, please share your wrap-up comments with us as well.
Just as long as you have time.
We've got a few minutes, a couple of minutes for you, please.
I'll be brief. Mostly what I want to do, even though I'll use different words, is harmonize what you just heard, which I think that our architects addressing the challenges of homelessness need to think of themselves more as social architects or political architects, because in one way or another, every one of the speakers on this panel has pointed to root problems or systemic problems, not architectural design problems, as the greatest impediments to the provision of housing and related services and supports. So what I think that does is to raise a very interesting and a very challenging set of questions or opportunities for self-examination for architects. I'm in the habit of saying that catastrophe is ecological. In other words, when things get really bad to the point of absolute calamity, that's when change takes place. It's also the worst time for change. It's the worst moment for change to take place. When all of us with goodwill on this topic have conversations amongst each other, we all wind up agreeing. It's clear that there needs to be a wider or a larger civic conversation, even just thinking of Victoria. And I point out what all of us know, which is that the best way to hold a civic conversation is called an election. That's the end of my thoughts.
Thank you, Jean, very much. And again, thank you all to all of the panelists. And I'm going to turn it back over to Chris Gower to hear his final thoughts and conclusions to the session here today.
We had such a great panel today. So many different avenues of attack on a really big topic that we haven't even begun to, to get our toehold on. Definitely the next session, I think we really want to make sure there's a lot of emphasis and interest in design on housing issues. This is really something where architects, I think, can make a terrific contribution, and something we'd like to expand into in the session in April. So I also wanted to commend all the speakers. I wanted to maybe put a little, I mean, you all come from such different backgrounds and have very important responsibilities. I just wanted to point out many of the responsibilities are very long term. Some of them are also have very immediate kind of pressing kind of immediacies, and there's no doubt that we need to all get in action on the topic. Jean Miller has really emphasized that very well. Having practical, immediate, and short-term solutions is just as important as the big picture. Thanks everyone so much for your help. Thank you, Catherine, especially. Excellent job. And we'll all keep in touch. Thank you.